I never thought I'd find someone like her. From the moment I met my wife, it felt like the stars had aligned. It was one of those cinematic moments, at a football stadium of all places. She was there in her team jersey, her eyes bright with excitement as she cheered for a last-minute goal. It was a surreal moment, and before I knew it, we struck up a conversation about our favorite team. From that day on, football wasn't just a shared passion, it became a cornerstone of our relationship. She was everything I could have asked for, beautiful, smart, and so cheerful it was contagious. Her laugh could light up a room, and she had this uncanny ability to understand me without me saying a word. We'd spend hours watching matches, debating players' performance, and sharing our hopes for the next season. It felt like I had found my soulmate, the one person who could match my love for the game and bring so much joy into my life. But, like anyone, she wasn't without her quirks. Sometimes her mood would shift out of nowhere. One moment she'd be laughing and making jokes, and the next, she'd be withdrawn and silent, refusing to explain what was wrong. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work. She had a demanding job with long hours. Whenever I asked, she'd shrug it off with a smile and a quick excuse, saying, "Oh, it's just one of those days. Don't worry about it." Her absences started becoming more frequent, too. She'd occasionally run late for work or leave abruptly for meetings she didn't mention beforehand. I trusted her completely, so I never pressed for details. If she said it was work-related, that was enough for me. Despite those little bumps, life with her felt like a dream. We got married after 2 years of dating, and I couldn't imagine life without her. Even when her moods confused me, I loved her deeply. She was my partner in every sense, and I couldn't wait to spend the rest of my life cheering for our team together. Little did I know, those small cracks in our seemingly perfect life were about to become impossible to ignore. Our life together was like a season-long winning streak, full of small victories and shared moments. Sundays were sacred in our home, especially during football season. We'd deck ourselves out in team colors, cook up game day snacks, and settle into the couch, ready for hours of yelling at the TV and celebrating goals as if we were on the field ourselves. Those were the days I cherished most, her laughter filling the room, the way she'd high-five me so hard it left my hands stinging, and the unspoken bond we shared every time our team scored. She was my biggest supporter, and I was hers. If the game didn't go well, she'd always find a way to cheer me up, teasing that I took football too seriously for someone who wasn't getting paid to play. She had this knack for making even the most frustrating moments feel lighter. We made a tradition of attending at least one live game every season. The energy of the stadium, the chants, and the sea of fans, it was our happy place. She was the kind of woman who could scream her lungs out for 90 minutes and still look stunning doing it. I'd often find myself watching her instead of the game, marveling at how lucky I was to have her in my life. But even in those golden moments, there were shadows I couldn't quite ignore. Her mood swings became more unpredictable over time. It wasn't just the occasional bad day anymore. Sometimes she'd retreat into herself for days on end, leaving me to tiptoe around her silence. If I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off with a vague, "It's nothing," or, "Work's just been a lot lately." I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Everyone has their struggles, right? And she was still the same cheerful, caring woman I fell in love with, most of the time. Besides, our shared love for football was always there to bring us back together. No matter what else was going on, game days were sacred. One memory stands out: it was the final match of the league, and we were watching it at home. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as the clock ticked into stoppage time. When our team scored the winning goal, we both jumped off the couch, screaming in pure joy. She threw her arms around me, and for a moment, it felt like nothing else in the world mattered. Looking back, I realize now that I clung to those moments because they masked the growing distance between us. Her unexplained absences became more frequent, and sometimes she'd seem distracted, even during our beloved football nights. I'd catch her checking her phone more often than usual, her smile faint but guarded. I didn't want to see the signs. I told myself it was just work stress, or maybe she needed more space. After all, no relationship is perfect, right? Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Our life together was still full of those golden moments, but the shadows were growing. I just didn't know how close I was to finding out what they meant. It was around the 3rd year of our marriage when my wife's best friend, Natalie, started appearing in our lives more frequently. They had been friends for years, long before I was in the picture. Natalie was a bright, outgoing woman who could make anyone laugh within minutes of meeting her. At first, I liked her. She brought out the carefree side of my wife, the one I had fallen in love with. The two of them would giggle over old stories, finish each other's sentences, and light up any room they entered together. But as time went on, I started noticing things. Natalie would often encourage my wife to go out, even when she seemed tired or stressed. If my wife had one of her mood swings, Natalie always had a way of excusing it or brushing it off. "She's just like that sometimes," Natalie would say with a laugh, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I didn't mind their friendship at first. After all, everyone needs their people. But over time, it felt like Natalie became a bigger part of my wife's life than I was. The two of them began spending more time together, dinner dates, shopping trips, even a weekend spa getaway. At first, I saw it as harmless. She needs to unwind, I told myself. Then came the day of that fateful football match. Her name was Emily, and she was more than my wife, she was my partner, my best friend, and my teammate in every sense. Our love for football had always been a thread that tied us together. So when the time came for us to attend one of the biggest matches of the season, we were both buzzing with excitement. It was one of those games every fan dreams of seeing live, and we had been counting down the days for weeks. But life has a way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect it. 2 days before the match, I woke up feeling off. At first, I thought it was nothing, a little fatigue, maybe a late night catching up to me. But by the end of the day, I was shivering under a blanket with a fever, a sore throat, and a pounding headache. Emily immediately sprang into action, her nurturing side kicking in. "You're not going anywhere like this," she said, placing a cool hand on my forehead. "We'll see how you feel tomorrow, but if you don't get better, I'm going to the game without you." I wasn't about to let a little flu stop me from cheering for our team. I loaded up on every cold medicine and home remedy I could think of, hot tea with honey, ginger shots, even some questionable concoctions Emily's mom swore by. I spent the next 48 hours bundled up on the couch, streaming highlights from previous games to keep my spirits up. Emily checked on me constantly, alternating between concern and gentle teasing. "If you miss this game, it'll be the first one in 5 years, she joked, though I could tell she was disappointed at the thought of going without me. By the morning of the match, I knew I wasn't going to make it. My fever had gone down, but my body felt like it had been hit by a truck. I could barely sit up without feeling dizzy. Emily, who had been trying to stay optimistic, finally admitted the obvious. "You're not going," she said firmly, her arms crossed in that way that meant there was no room for argument. I hated the idea of her going alone. Football was something we always shared, it wouldn't feel right for one of us to be there without the other. "Why don't you take Natalie?" I suggested, almost begrudgingly. "She loves the team as much as we do, and it'd be a shame to waste the ticket." Emily's face lit up immediately. "Are you sure?" she asked, though her tone already betrayed her excitement. "Yeah," I said with a weak smile. "Just promise you'll cheer loud enough for both of us." Within minutes, she was on the phone with Natalie, who was more than happy to join her. They were out the door an hour later, both dressed in team jerseys and scarves, their energy palpable even as I lay in bed watching them leave. As the match started, I propped myself up in bed, flipping on the TV to watch from home. It wasn't the same as being there in person, but it was still thrilling to see the stadium packed with fans, the chants echoing through the screen. When our team scored the winning goal in the final minutes, I couldn't contain myself. I jumped out of bed, fists in the air, shouting like a madman. My joy was short-lived, though. As the broadcast cut to shots of the crowd, the camera landed on Emily and Natalie. At first, I laughed, seeing their pure excitement as they hugged and jumped up and down. But then, to my shock, I saw Emily kiss Natalie. It was quick, almost innocent, and I convinced myself it was nothing more than a moment of celebration between friends. But something about it lingered in my mind, a faint, uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. When Emily came home that night, I jokingly mentioned that her kiss had made it onto the broadcast. She froze for a split second, then laughed it off, but I could see the tension in her smile. "Oh, that's embarrassing," she said, brushing it aside. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I really did. Things started to change after that match. Emily became distant, not in a way that was immediately obvious, but subtle enough to gnaw at the back of my mind. She wasn't as engaged in our conversations, often distracted by her phone or lost in thought. I tried to brush it off, blaming work stress or fatigue, but the uneasiness only grew. The breaking point came one night about 2 weeks after the game. Emily had texted me earlier that day, saying she would be working late. It wasn't unusual. Her job sometimes required her to stay behind to finish up reports or prepare for meetings. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. "Don't wait up," she had written casually, adding a little winking emoji. But midnight came and went, and she still wasn't home. I texted her, asking if everything was okay. No response. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I sat there in our living room, my stomach churning with worry, my mind racing with possibilities. Was she in an accident? Did something happen at work? By 3 a.m., I was pacing the house, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. I kept checking her location through the family tracking app we both used, but her phone was offline. My thoughts spiraled, half of me terrified something terrible had happened, the other half whispering things I didn't want to believe. Finally, at 5 a.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of her car pulling into the driveway. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger and confusion. Where had she been? Why hadn't she answered her phone? Emily walked through the door looking disheveled. Her hair was a mess, her clothes slightly wrinkled, and she had this far-off look in her eyes like she was somewhere else entirely. "Emily, where were you?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've been worried sick." She blinked at me, almost as if she was surprised to see me. "I told you I was working late," she said, brushing past me to drop her bag on the kitchen counter. "Things just ran over, and I ended up crashing at Natalie's for a couple of hours. I didn't want to drive home so late." "At Natalie's?" I repeated, incredulous. "Why didn't you answer your phone? I've been calling and texting you all night." Her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms defensively. "My phone died, okay? And I didn't think it was a big deal." "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I wanted to believe her, to accept her explanation and move on, but something about her tone, her body language, it didn't add up. "Emily, you could have told me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I was worried something happened to you." "I'm sorry, okay," she snapped, her voice tinged with irritation. "I didn't mean to upset you, but I'm exhausted, and I really don't want to have this conversation right now." With that, she brushed past me and went to the bedroom, leaving me standing there in the kitchen, feeling more lost than ever. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our conversation in my head. Was I overreacting? Or was this the beginning of something I didn't want to see? The months leading up to the World Cup were a strange mix of routine and unease. On the surface, things between Emily and me seemed normal, our schedules fell back into their usual rhythm, and we even started making plans for the tournament. But underneath it all, something had shifted. After that night she came home late, I found myself second-guessing everything. Every time she picked up her phone, I wondered who she was texting. Every time she smiled for no reason, I couldn't help but ask myself what was on her mind. I hated feeling this way, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness. Emily, for her part, acted like nothing had changed. She was still the cheerful, outgoing woman I fell in love with, most of the time. She'd talk about work, her plans with Natalie, or the latest updates from our football team. But there were cracks in her facade. She was moodier than before, and her temper flared at the smallest things. If I mentioned her long nights or questioned her whereabouts, she'd get defensive almost immediately. "You're obsessed," she snapped one evening when I casually asked about a late work dinner. "I don't understand why you're always so suspicious." "I'm not doing anything wrong." Her words stung. I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone didn't sit right. Still, I kept my doubts to myself, afraid of starting another argument. To distract myself, I threw my energy into preparing for the World Cup. It had been a dream of ours to attend together, and we had been planning the trip for over a year. I bought us matching jerseys, printed out itineraries, and even started learning a few phrases in the host country's language. But Emily's enthusiasm didn't match mine. Whenever I brought up the trip, she seemed distracted or indifferent. Yeah, it'll be fun," she'd say, barely looking up from her phone. It wasn't like her, football had always been our thing, something we shared with so much passion. A month before the tournament, I suggested we plan out the matches we wanted to attend together. She agreed half-heartedly, scrolling through her phone as I excitedly talked about our schedule. "Which game are you most excited for?" I asked, trying to engage her. She paused for a moment before shrugging. "I don't know. They're all the same to me." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about football, it felt like we were losing the connection we once had. By the time the World Cup was a week away, things between us felt strained but manageable. I kept telling myself that the trip would bring us back together, that we just needed some time away from our routines to reconnect. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. About 2 weeks before the World Cup, something shifted in Emily. The coldness and distance that had defined the past few months seemed to fade away, replaced by a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. She started paying more attention to me, asking about my day, and even making an effort to spend more time together. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. One evening, she surprised me by cooking my favorite meal, a rare occasion given her busy schedule. As we sat together at the dining table, laughing and reminiscing about past football matches, it felt like the old Emily was back. Maybe the trip is exactly what we need, I thought to myself. Things might actually get better. We started talking more about the World Cup, finally mapping out which matches we'd attend and planning the sightseeing we'd squeeze in between games. It was the first time in months I felt genuinely optimistic about us. But just when everything seemed to be getting back on track, another wrench was thrown into our plans. One evening, Emily came home looking frustrated. "You won't believe this," she said, dropping her bag on the couch. "My boss just told me I have to stay 3 extra days to help finish this campaign." I tried arguing, but you know how he is. "It's not negotiable." Her tone was apologetic, and she gave me that look, the one that always melted my frustration. "I'm really sorry," she added. "I know how much this trip means to you. But I promise I'll catch up as soon as I can." I could see she was upset, and despite the little voice in my head telling me something was off, I pushed my doubts aside. "It's okay," I said, trying to stay positive. I'll book you a flight for 3 days later. It's not ideal, but at least we'll still have most of the tournament together. The next morning, I arranged everything. I kept my original flight and found a later one for her. It wasn't cheap booking so close to the date, but I didn't care. This trip was too important to let anything ruin it. When I showed her the new ticket, she gave me a tight hug and a kiss on the cheek. "You're the best," she said with a smile. For the first time in a long while, her words felt genuine. Over the next week, she seemed more attentive than ever. She'd sit with me in the evenings, helping me pack and even joking about which jerseys we should wear for each match. It felt like a turning point, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Still, in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake a nagging doubt. The timing of everything, the sudden warmth, the delayed trip, felt almost too convenient. But I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, things were finally looking up. Or so I thought. The week leading up to the World Cup was chaotic but exciting. I had finished packing and kept checking in with Emily to make sure she was all set for her later flight. She seemed unusually cheerful, more so than I'd seen her in months. Her warm attitude made me hopeful that maybe the trip would truly bring us closer together. We spent our last evening together watching one of our favorite football matches on TV. Emily was animated and full of energy, laughing and cheering like she used to. It felt like old times. As I headed to bed that night, I remember thinking, maybe I was wrong to doubt her. Maybe things are finally turning around. The next morning, I kissed her goodbye, grabbed my suitcase, and headed to the airport. She hugged me tightly, telling me how much she'd miss me, and reminded me to text her when I landed. But when I arrived at the airport, everything went sideways. The weather had taken a turn for the worse, and my flight was delayed indefinitely. After several hours of waiting, I was finally informed that the flight had been postponed for at least 48 hours. Frustrated but resigned, I decided to head back home. On the way, I texted Emily to let her know about the delay. She didn't respond, which wasn't entirely unusual since she sometimes got caught up at work. Still, I felt a twinge of unease. By the time I arrived home, it was mid-afternoon. I assumed Emily would be at work, so I quietly let myself in, planning to relax and figure out what to do with my unexpected free time. But as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I heard something that made my heart stop. Voices. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was a TV left on or something from outside. But as I got closer to the bedroom door, the voices became clearer, intimate whispers, followed by soft laughter. My stomach sank as realization dawned. My hands were trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to avoid whatever was on the other side. But I couldn't. I had to know. I opened the door slowly, and there she was, Emily, in our bed, completely naked. And she wasn't alone. Natalie was with her, equally undressed, their faces flushed with an intimacy I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. The air was thick with the scent of betrayal. They didn't notice me at first, too wrapped up in each other. It wasn't until I coughed, an involuntary sound caused by the tightness in my chest, that they turned to face me. Emily's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Natalie froze, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. My whole world felt like it had come crashing down around me, and I couldn't think of a single word to say. Standing there in the doorway, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. My chest tightened as if I couldn't breathe, and my thoughts spiraled in every direction at once. Emily scrambled to cover herself, clutching the bedsheet around her as though it could shield her from the enormity of what had just been exposed. Natalie, on the other hand, remained frozen, her eyes darting between me and Emily, as though unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Care to explain? I finally managed to say, my voice trembling with equal parts anger and devastation. Emily opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at me with tears welling up in her eyes, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook with an emotional display. Say something, I demanded, my voice cracking. How long has this been going on? It's not what it looks like, Emily blurted, her voice weak and unconvincing. Don't insult my intelligence, I snapped, taking a step into the room. I walked into my house, into our bedroom, and this is what I see. So don't even try to spin it. Natalie stood abruptly, wrapping herself in a blanket and mumbling, I think I should leave. Yeah, maybe you should, I said coldly, glaring at her as she hurriedly gathered her things and left the room. The sound of the front door closing behind her seemed to echo through the house, amplifying the deafening silence that followed. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the sheet around her. She didn't meet my eyes, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to say anything. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry. Sorry? I repeated, my voice rising. That's all you have to say? Sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done? How long has this been going on? Her shoulders slumped, and she buried her face in her hands. It started before we got married, she admitted, her voice muffled. Natalie and I, it's complicated. Complicated? I said, laughing bitterly. You're cheating on me with your best friend, and you call it complicated? You've been lying to me this entire time, years, Emily. Years. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I love you. I really do. But Natalie and I, we've always had this connection. It's not like what you and I have, it's different. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I felt sick, disgusted, but above all, betrayed. So, what? I said. You thought you could have it both ways? Keep your little secret and play the perfect wife at the same time? Did you ever think about how this would affect me? About what this would do to us? I didn't want to hurt you, she said through her sobs. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You succeeded in destroying everything instead. I couldn't bear to look at her anymore. Turning on my heel, I left the room and headed downstairs, my thoughts a storm of anger, sadness, and confusion. I needed to clear my head, to process what had just happened. But no matter how hard I tried, one question kept pounding in my mind, how could she do this to me? As I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, I realized there was no going back. Whatever love or trust we'd built over the years had been shattered, and no apology could piece it together again. I knew what I had to do, but the weight of it felt unbearable. The marriage I had once cherished so deeply was over, and Emily had made sure of that. The hours after discovering Emily and Natalie together felt like an eternity. I sat in the living room, my hands gripping the armrests of the chair so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The storm of emotions inside me, anger, betrayal, heartbreak, made it impossible to think clearly. I kept replaying the moment in my head, opening the door, seeing them together, the look of panic on Emily's face. Upstairs, I could hear her moving around. A door creaked, followed by muffled sobs that filtered down the staircase. I didn't care. If she was crying, it wasn't because of what she had done, it was because she got caught. After what felt like hours, Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, still wrapped in the sheet. She hesitated before coming down, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a moment, she stood silently in the doorway to the living room, clutching the fabric around her like armor. "Can we talk?" she finally asked, her voice small and fragile. "What's there to talk about?" I said coldly, not even looking at her. She stepped into the room cautiously, as if afraid I might explode again. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her words trembling. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I never meant for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You didn't want to hurt me? Then what was the plan, Emily? Keep sneaking around behind my back forever? Or were you planning to tell me eventually? What exactly did you think was going to happen? She sat down on the edge of the couch, as far from me as possible. I don't know, she admitted, wiping her eyes. I thought I could handle it. That I could keep my feelings for Natalie separate from what we had. But it got out of control. And now, she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. I stared at the floor, my mind racing, while she sat there crying softly. Finally, I broke the silence. How long, Emily? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been lying to me? She hesitated, then sighed deeply. Since before we got married, she said. Natalie and I, we were involved back then. I thought I could leave it behind when I married you, but it never really ended. It's been, off and on for years. Her words felt like knives in my chest. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. For years? All those moments we shared, all the plans we made for our future, how much of it was a lie? And you didn't think to tell me? I said, my voice rising. You didn't think I deserved to know the truth before I committed my life to you? Before we built everything together? She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to lose you. I love you, and I didn't want to ruin what we had. What we had? I repeated bitterly. What exactly did we have, Emily? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like it was all a lie. I swear it wasn't, she said, her voice breaking. I loved you, I still love you. What Natalie and I had was different. But it didn't mean I didn't care about you. Her words only made me angrier. Do you even hear yourself? I snapped. You're trying to justify betraying me for years, and you think it's okay because you still cared about me? That's not love, Emily. That's selfishness. She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. You're right, she said softly. I was selfish. I didn't want to lose either of you, so I lied. And now I've lost everything. I stood up abruptly, unable to sit there any longer. You didn't lose everything, Emily. You threw it away. You made a choice, and now you have to live with it. As I walked toward the stairs, she called after me, her voice desperate. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll end things with Natalie, I already have. Just don't give up on us. I turned to face her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. There is no us anymore, I said quietly. You destroyed it the moment you decided I wasn't enough. I went upstairs and packed a bag, my hands shaking with every item I folded. As much as it hurt to leave, I couldn't stay there, surrounded by the memories of what we had and the realization of what it had all meant. By the time I walked out the door, Emily was sitting on the couch, sobbing into her hands. I didn't look back. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. I barely registered the scenery or the music playing on the radio. All I could think about was how my life had fallen apart in a single afternoon. When I arrived, my mom opened the door and took one look at me before pulling me into a hug. What happened? She asked gently, her voice filled with concern. I couldn't bring myself to explain everything, so I just shook my head and said, I need some time. She nodded, not pressing me for details. As I settled into the spare room, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how things had gone so wrong. Emily had been my everything, the person I thought I'd spend my life with. And now, all I could feel was the aching void she had left behind. The one thing I knew for sure was that there was no going back. The life we had built was over, and I had to figure out how to start over without her. The days that followed were a blur of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Staying at my parents' house felt surreal, like I had been ripped out of my own life and dropped into someone else's. My mom and dad gave me space, though I could tell they were worried. They tiptoed around me, their concern etched into every glance they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I spent most of my time alone in the spare room, staring at the ceiling or scrolling aimlessly through my phone. Messages from Emily popped up periodically, long, emotional texts filled with apologies and promises to make things right. I didn't reply to any of them. I couldn't. What was there to say? My friends reached out, too, some offering support, others asking questions I didn't have the energy to answer. What happened? Are you okay? Do you want to talk? All I could manage were brief responses, not now, or I'll call you later, but later never came. One evening, about a week after I left, Emily called. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. I stared at the screen as it rang, her name flashing brightly as though mocking me. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what she had to say, but I knew it wouldn't help. Instead, I let it go to voicemail and listened to her message later. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, she said, her voice trembling. But please, don't throw everything away. We've been through so much together, and I can't imagine my life without you. I'll do whatever it takes, therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just, please, don't give up on us. Her words stirred something in me, pain, longing, maybe even a sliver of doubt. But they also ignited a fire of resentment. How could she beg me to fight for something she had so casually destroyed? Still, as the days turned into weeks, I found myself replaying our relationship over and over in my head. Every memory, every laugh, every kiss, it all felt tainted now. How much of it had been real? How many of those moments had been shared with Natalie in the back of her mind? I started seeing a therapist at my mom's insistence, though I was skeptical at first. The first session was awkward, I didn't know where to start, or even how to put my feelings into words. But as I sat there, the story poured out of me, piece by painful piece. I feel like a fool, I admitted, my voice cracking. I trusted her completely. I never even suspected, and now, everything I thought I knew about my life is gone. The therapist nodded, her expression calm and understanding. It's natural to feel that way after a betrayal like this, she said gently. But it's important to remember that her actions don't define your worth. You loved her honestly and fully, that says more about you than her betrayal ever could. It wasn't a magic fix, but those words stuck with me. Slowly, I began to piece myself back together. I started going for walks in the mornings, rediscovering simple pleasures like the crisp air and the way sunlight filtered through the trees. I reconnected with old friends, opening up to those who had been patiently waiting for me to reach out. Emily's messages became less frequent, though she still texted now and then. I never responded, and eventually, the messages stopped altogether. It was both a relief and a strange kind of sadness. As much as I hated what she had done, letting go of her completely felt like losing a part of myself. One afternoon, about a month after I left, my mom knocked on the door of the spare room. "There's someone here to see you," she said hesitantly. I frowned, confused. "Who?" "It's Natalie." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" "She says she wants to talk to you." Should I tell her to leave? I hesitated, my heart pounding. The last thing I wanted was to see Natalie, to hear whatever excuses or explanations she thought might justify what had happened. But part of me was curious, what could she possibly have to say? "No, I'll talk to her," I said finally, steeling myself. As I walked into the living room and saw Natalie standing there, looking uncharacteristically nervous, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me, anger, bitterness, and a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. why are you here?" I asked, my voice cold. She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now," she began. "But I needed to come. I needed to tell you my side of the story." "I don't care about your side," I said sharply. "You betrayed me, just like she did." "I know," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you." I thought, she stopped, shaking her head. "I thought I could stay in her life without ruining yours. I was wrong." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I stared at her, my anger battling with a strange, unwelcome sense of pity. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you," I said finally. "But you're right about one thing, you were wrong. You were both wrong." Natalie nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, before turning and walking out the door. As I watched her leave, I felt an odd sense of closure. It wasn't forgiveness, and it didn't erase the pain, but it was a step toward moving forward. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The confrontation with Natalie stirred something in me, closure, perhaps, or maybe just the first real step toward letting go. It didn't erase the hurt or the betrayal, but it gave me a sense of finality. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. There was nothing left to salvage, no more unanswered questions. I could finally begin to move on. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of Emily. The songs we used to sing along to in the car, the smell of her favorite shampoo lingering on a jacket she'd once borrowed, even something as simple as seeing our team's logo on TV. But with every day that passed, the pain dulled just a little bit more. Therapy helped, too. My therapist encouraged me to focus on the things I could control, to find joy in the small victories. "You don't have to rebuild everything at once," she reminded me during one session. "Start with one piece at a time." So, I did. I began jogging in the mornings, something I hadn't done since college. I spent time with friends, accepting invitations I'd previously turned down. I even signed up for a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. About 6 months after leaving Emily, I was at a bookstore when I met someone new. Her name was Clara, and she was nothing like Emily. She was soft-spoken and warm, with a quiet strength that drew me in. We struck up a conversation over a mutual love of historical novels, and before I knew it, I was asking if she'd like to grab coffee sometime. To my surprise, she said yes. Our first date was awkward but refreshing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be myself without the weight of expectations or unresolved tension. Clara and I spent hours talking, laughing about our shared inability to bake anything edible and debating the merits of various book adaptations. It was slow at first. I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, and Clara understood that. She was patient, giving me space to heal while gently nudging me to open up when I was ready. As the months passed, I found myself looking forward to our time together. Clara brought a sense of calm and steadiness to my life, something I hadn't realized I was missing. With her, there were no secrets, no unspoken doubts. But the past has a way of creeping back when you least expect it. One evening, while Clara and I were out for dinner, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, figuring it was just another telemarketer. But curiosity got the better of me later that night, and I listened to the message. It was Emily's mother. "Hi, I know it's been a long time, and I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice heavy with worry. "But I thought you should know. Emily's in the hospital. She's not doing well. I think she could really use someone to talk to. If you feel up to it, please call me back." My chest tightened as I replayed the message. A part of me wanted to delete it and move on. After everything Emily had put me through, she didn't deserve my sympathy. But another part of me, a softer, more empathetic part, wondered if I could live with myself if I didn't at least find out what was going on. The next day, I called her mother. She explained that Emily had been struggling for months, spiraling into drug use and severe depression after our separation. Eventually, it had all caught up to her, and she had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital after an overdose. Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, I didn't want this for her. I didn't want her to suffer, even if she had brought it on herself. I visited her once, more out of a sense of closure than anything else. She looked frail, a shadow of the vibrant woman I had once loved. We talked briefly, exchanging awkward pleasantries, but there wasn't much to say. When I left, I felt a strange sense of peace. Emily's choices had led her down a dark path, but I was finally free of the weight of her betrayal. As I walked back to my car, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the horizon. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to hope. My life wasn't perfect, and there were still scars that hadn't fully healed. But I had found a sense of clarity, a belief that I could move forward. Clara was waiting for me when I got home, a smile lighting up her face as I walked through the door. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity. "It's getting better," I said, and for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference.